Hello bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a video about the Wheel of Time series. I think I'm going to title this like Introduction and Tips, but basically I want to talk about the series as a whole and some reasons why you might or might not be interested in reading it, and I'll also include some tips for reading the series at the end of the video. I'm going to include timestamps down in the description box for when I talk about different things in this video, so you guys can kind of hop around and watch what you like. Just an FYI, I actually do this in almost all of my videos, but I pretty much always forget to talk about it in my introduction, and honestly if I said it in every introduction, that'd probably get a little repetitive anyways. As some of you might know, I am co-hosting a read-along of the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan / Brandon Sanderson, along with Roya from Unicorn Hunter Books. I'll link my announcement video for the read-along, which will have more information, but basically we're doing one book a month along with some live shows where we will go into spoiler discussions about each book. We also have a Goodreads group, which I will link for you down in the description box, where you can go and chat about each book in between live shows. So the way that I'm going to set up this video is I'm going to talk about the series pretty broadly as a whole and things about it that I really like. These things are like my buzzwords. While I'm calling them pros, they might be cons for some people. And then I'm going to follow that up with cons of the series, things that I think most people universally would consider to be downsides of the series, so that you know what to expect when you're going into it. And then I'm going to end the video by giving some tips on how to go about reading the series. I think those tips will be primarily useful for first-time readers, but there might be some things in there that more experienced Wheel of Time readers might appreciate as well. The reason why I wanted to do this type of video is because I'm fully aware that I cannot be objective when it comes to this series. It holds such a special place in my heart because I grew up reading it practically. I started reading it as a teenager, and there are parts of the series that I have reread multiple times as like new books were coming out. So when I think about this series, it's very nostalgic for me. It gives me the warm and fuzzies and is very comforting to read. Because of this, I know that I'm not objective when it comes to this series, and I am fully aware that not everybody is gonna love the series as much as I do. So I kind of wanted to make a video like this to give people a better idea on what the series is like and whether or not they want to embark on this journey with us. I want to start by saying I know that these books are shelved as adult books. I honestly think that has more to do with like the length of the series and the complexity of the series as far as the world and the plot. There is not really any adult content in these books. In fact, I'd say they're probably a lot less violent than some of the YA books that I've read. There's not explicit sex scenes. There's not really any sex scenes at all in the series. And I also think that when this was published has a lot to do with the fact that it's shelved as an adult series, because I think that YA wasn't an established age category at that time. And the main characters themselves are in their teens. They're like 16 to 18 years old. I feel like if this was published now, it could possibly be a young adult series, but again, it is much more complex, I think, than a lot of YA. So without further ado, here are some things that I think are pros of the Wheel of Time series. So if I was to describe the series to someone like as a whole, I would start by saying it is an epic high fantasy series. I would also say it's a classic story of good versus evil, and it's a hero or chosen one story. And many books in this series have elements of like a journey. I don't know about you guys, those are pretty much all buzzwords for me. Secondly, I'd probably say that Robert Jordan is pretty heavily influenced by Tolkien, which of course is another classic good versus evil hero sort of story. Robert Jordan's world building also draws heavily from the Lord of the Rings series. Another big influence on the world building of this series, I would say, is the myths and legends and stories around King Arthur, which again is something that I absolutely love. Something else that I really love about this series is the expansive world. I have come across very few other series that have quite as large of a world as this one. I mean, it's pretty similar to the level of like Game of Thrones and Westeros. Probably not on the same level as the Cosmere, because that I think is like multiple planets. And honestly, there are places in this world that have been hinted at, that are full of mystery, that I don't know are ever explored or revealed within the series at all. And I actually kind of like that. I like that there is so much to this world that we might not necessarily see every corner of it before the series is over. And within this large world, there are a multitude of countries with their own governments, their own cultures, their own dialects, their own religions. So the world building here is pretty complex and pretty sophisticated, and I love that. Another thing that I love about this world is that there are a ton of characters, and this might be something that is a bit of a turnoff for some people. Basically, there is one character that ends up being like the hero figure of the series, so he is one main character within himself, but then there are, including him, there are 3 main characters that are like the main characters, and then you have like a circle of, I don't know, 7 to 10 characters that are pretty important and you get their point of views fairly often, and then you have like even more characters where you might get their point of view every once in a while, but you might not know how important that character is in that moment. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of characters that are introduced like in the first few books that turn out to be fairly important characters and keep showing up in later books as well, but you might not realize that when you first are introduced to them because they might play a very small role in the beginning. And if you've read some of the later books, their true identity has been revealed, so then when you go back and read the first few books, you're like, oh my god, this is mind-blowing. I guess that kind of leads me to my next point, that this series is really great for rereading, not only because you have a better idea of who some of these characters are when they're first introduced, their world building and different plot aspects, that there are so many Easter eggs throughout the series. As many times as I've reread it, I feel like I'm always learning something new or making new connections, and I think that's one of the reasons why there is such a large fan base for this series, because as the books were coming out, you know, they took a while to complete the series. There were a lot of people discussing theories. There's a huge fandom for this series. It's just not very prevalent or talked about here on YouTube or even in the book community. But I think that's just because it's an older series and people aren't really talking about it. We're hoping to change that. Okay, so now moving on to more of the negative side of the series, more of my cons. And I think the first one that is quite apparent to everyone is that the series is incredibly long. Not only is it 14 books plus a novella, which I'm pretty sure the novella is like the size of a normal book, but each of these books are around 1,000 pages depending on what edition you're picking up. So not only is the series long, but each book within the series is quite long as well. I think the general consensus online is that the first 6 or 7 books are really good and don't really start to drag too much, but I think there's a gap between, 7 to 10 to 11 that people think those books were fairly slow. I know I personally thought book 9 was extremely slow. In fact, I thought it was the longest book in the series, just like what I remembered from my reading experience, and turns out it's probably one of the shortest books in the series. But then after book 10 or 11, the last few that Brandon Sanderson wrote, which I guess I haven't mentioned that, but Brandon Sanderson finished out the series because Robert Jordan sadly passed away before he could complete the series. But those last few that he wrote, people think were a lot more fast-paced and action-packed than maybe the few that came before it. So that is one downside to such a long series. Not every single book in the series can be amazing. I will also say that because there are so many books in the series, some of them seem a little bit formulaic at times. There does seem to be a little bit of the theme of like characters getting separated, and then towards the end of the book, a lot of them end up in the same area, so some big event can happen. And I know that that can get tiring after reading a story structure similar to that over multiple books. Another potential con that I want to talk about is that it can at times be a little tropey. I think it's important to keep in mind that this was written a long time ago, but I know that when I was first reading the series, one thing that absolutely drove me insane was the miscommunication trope. There were so many times in this series that I was really frustrated because I felt if everyone in this book would just be open and honest with each other and explain things instead of keeping secrets, that a lot of the issues and things that they were going through would be resolved. So I could definitely see that being frustrating for a lot of people. At the same time, I think that these characters are keeping these secrets for believable reasons, for reasons that fit with their character and what they're going through. Doesn't mean those decisions were smart, but I can understand why the characters did those things. But I think some people might feel it's a little contrived. Speaking of characters not making the smartest decisions, especially in the beginning of the series, the characters don't always make the smartest choices. Something that we've already started to discuss a little bit in our discussion boards in the Goodreads group is how the very beginning of this first book definitely sets up the three main characters to be seen as boys instead of men. When you look at the character arcs as a whole, I think it can be really impressive, or at least it was to me. I kind of like going back and seeing how childish these characters were at the beginning of the series because they definitely changed throughout the series. I mean, you got to start on one end of the spectrum to be able to have a big character growth, right? Also, in classic fantasy fashion, the series is full of names and made-up words that you cannot spell or pronounce. I do have a tip about that coming up in my tip section, but I could see that being frustrating for some people. But at the same time, this was written back in the 90s, so it shouldn't be too surprising. Another potential con for this series is the romance. I would say that romance does not play a big role in this series. There is romance. Different characters do couple up as you go through the series. I didn't really notice this when I had read this series previously, but I know that on my most recent reread, I have noticed that some of the couplings happen sort of quickly. There's not a lot of build-up to them, and I think that might bother some people. It's hard for me to judge because in my mind, all of these characters have been coupled forever. I don't see them any other way except being part of this couple, but I think if you like well-written romance or slow-burning romance, you're not gonna find that here. Okay, I think those are all the cons to the series that I wanted to talk about. I'm sure there are other things people won't like about the series. Those are kind of the things that I could see people having problems with and want to give a heads up so people know what to expect going into the series. So now let's talk about a few tips that I have for reading the series. When it comes to the format, I personally would recommend getting your hands on a physical copy. Not necessarily that you read strictly from a physical copy, but I think that having one available for reference is going to be really helpful. The reason why I say this is, one, there are maps. Most of the maps are at the beginning of the book, but sometimes when you get into different cities and things like that, there will be a city map that is in front of that chapter. So I think being able to reference that easily can be really helpful. I know you can get maps in ebooks as well, but I personally find it really cumbersome to flip back and forth between the page that I'm reading in an ebook and the map. And then obviously, audiobook, you can't see the map at all. Another reason why I think having a physical copy on hand can be really helpful is there's also a glossary in the back. So I mentioned earlier that this series is, classic old fantasy in the sense that you have a lot of words and names and that are impossible to pronounce or spell. And I also mentioned earlier that there are a ton of characters that you might only get quick introductions to in certain books. So in the back of all of these books, there is a glossary that should have a listing for every character that is mentioned in that book, as well as other words pertaining to the world building, the religion system, the magic system. There should be little descriptions for all of that in the glossary. I also believe that each glossary that's in the back of the book is spoiler free for that book. So, I mean, if you're reading book 2, don't peek at the glossary for book 5 because there will be spoilers. For the reasons of being able to access the maps and the glossary at the back as easily as you want, I recommend having a physical copy on hand. I personally have been listening to the audiobooks, and I think if you are a rereader, that audiobooks are a great way to go. In fact, the narrators for this series, I think they do a lot of Tor fantasy books because I've heard them before. I'll pop their names on the screen because I don't want to missay them, but I have loved their narration of the first 4 books. I think they're great narrators. I don't want to scare people away from listening to the audiobooks because I think that they are good audiobooks, but I think first-time readers might have a hard time grasping everything that's going on just by listening to the book. So maybe do a combination of audiobook and physical/ebook. And next is a little bit of a PSA, but I want you guys to be aware that there are a lot of spoilers on the internet. So the series has been around for a very long time, or at least most of the series has been around for a very long time. It wasn't completed until 2014. Most of the websites and information that's out on the internet is pretty full of spoilers. There have been some reread recaps that are posted on Tor.com, and most of them are full of spoilers. I checked. So One website that I personally have found very helpful is library.tarvalon.net. I will put it on the screen. Because so many people in our Goodreads group are rereading the series or just want a place to talk about the series, but they read it a while ago, I have been using the chapter summaries that are available on the library.tarvalon.net website and put them into like a Google Doc for people to reference. By doing that, I have learned that this website does contain chapter summaries that are spoiler-free. However, it is just the chapter summaries. All of the rest of their website is not spoiler-free. So my tip is tread carefully on the internet. I know that I have even spoiled something for myself when I was trying to refresh my memory. If you want chapter or book recaps, try out library.tarvalon.net. Just be careful to stick strictly to the summary section, otherwise you might see some spoilers. Okay guys, I think those are all of the many things that I wanted to say to you about the Wheel of Time series. Hopefully this little video got you guys excited about reading the series and you'll want to join in the read along. Links in the description box. But if me talking about the series made you realize that you don't want to read the series, then good, because that was the whole point of this video, is to help people figure out if they want or don't want to read the series. Do you guys have any questions or comments pertaining to the things that I talked about in this video, or if you have any suggestions for our read-along that we're doing, be sure to leave them down in the comment section, or feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I post bookish videos at least once a week and sometimes more. That's all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye. The video is because I have said so many times on this show, I have said so many times on this series, I have said so many times on my channel that, excluding the last book or two, since I don't know yet, I guess my main point here is that it's really big, but none of them, there aren't really like, bye.